You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Monday Matters. Jen, this is an episode coming out at the beginning of the month of December. I've said this so many times in our other conversations. My wife calls Maycember and December the two hardest months of the year for school administrators. So how are you doing? What's the temperature in Dublin, Ohio?
Well, we are in a cold snap that doesn't seem that it's going to stop. So it feels definitely like winter. And, you know, I love this time of year. There's 3 birthdays in my house. There's Christmas. There's, there's a happy vibe. So I'm good. We have a lot of snow. We've already had our first snow day, which is shocking because usually that doesn't happen till January or February if it happens at all. So, yeah, we had a snow day. So we're good. We're good. Yuletide. We're good.
Yeah. Well, I know there's, I was just on a call with some friends in California and they were teasing us that, they had been in the room with an administrator that week from Minnesota. And she was like, why do you guys all have on sweaters? And they were all bundled up because it was probably 65, where they were.
Right.
And so anyone listening out there in cold climates, kudos to you for managing all that snow. Any one of you that stay in warm climates all the time, this is video, so I guess I could stick out my tongue at you, but I'm not going to do it.
Right.
That you get to enjoy that. Well, Jen, we wanted to use this week's conversation to begin with this question to just listeners. And this is something I brought to a mastermind recently from my book, Whose Permission Are You Waiting For? An Educator's Guide to Doing What You Love. And the question is one that one of the leaders in the room said she actually took it to her husband and asked him. It was the question at the very end of a chapter. And so I'm just going to read the question because I wanted to just have this conversation with you. And the question is, if you had to define yourself without a title or a position or even the label of parent or spouse or partner, how would you define yourself? And she admitted that question was really hard for both of them to answer. I thought it was really neat because eventually their descriptions for each other were more around the qualities that they admired about each other than just the titles, which is one of the reasons I asked that question. But I find that so often that question stumps a lot of us because we do often define ourselves based on our titles or labels or even the stages of life we're in. So let me just pause for a second because I know you've got some thoughts too.
Right. Well, I read, when you sent some of these ideas to me, I started thinking about them and I thought about my very first Instagram bio and I listed who I was. And I said school administrator, mom, yogi, runner, reader, writer. And a lot of people do that. And our intent in doing so is to show we are many things. Mm-hmm. But you're asking us to take it a step further. You're saying, you're really landing on this powerful idea that defining oneself by core values is really the key to achieving authentic outcomes, not just professionally, not just with our families. And that really resonated with me because the inverse is also true, right? The idea that moving forward based on fear or titles or whatever means we fail to live our cherished values.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge. That's a real challenge.
Well, and I think it's not just a challenge for us as humans, but I'm going to make a distinction that wasn't mine to make. I was at a conference with in September where I was keynoting, but I attended the other keynotes because I was really curious what was going to be taught. And the conference organizers had invited a couple of speakers who run an organization called the Mom Complex, Catherine Winchek and Lauren Fitzgerald. I think I'm pronouncing their names correctly, and I'll put a link in the notes. But they've done a lot of research around how difficult it is for mothers in particular to answer this question. And I wrote down a few things that they said in the keynote that it's insightful to me. One is that across the mothers that they survey and work with consistently, they hear lots of doubt. A lot of moms just assume I'm doing it wrong. 2, there are no such things as experienced mothers because every stage is the one you've never been through before. Mm-hmm. 2, a lot of mothers feel this like unbelievable pressure to be perfect. And so some of them are finally beginning to reject that notion. Four, their research has shown them what you and I both know is true. Parenting has to be a team sport, but unfortunately, a lot of mothers get relied on as the main player. And five, moms carry this really heavy mental load of trying to survive. And the point they made in that last point that stood out to me was they were leading a conference one time for couples, and they asked them to turn to each other and say the last 5 or 6 things you've said to yourself when in self-talk. And across the room, the women were expressing all these doubts, and the men were like, oh, I never think that about myself. And so there was this aha moment for me as a leader and a father, also realizing that this very question that you and I are chewing on can sometimes also be challenging depending on what your roles and labels are. And I know I'm not saying anything you don't already know, Jen. In fact, I don't know if we can talk about some of the other things you're working on and writing right now, but let's go there for a second too.
Well, everything you said resonates with me, certainly as a woman and as a mother. And I have long spoken and thought, sometimes with resentment, about the mental load you referenced, right? And so, I have an amazing partner and husband, but there are mornings where I will get up, I will work out, I will pack lunches, I'll make breakfast, I'll feed the dog, I will take a shower, I will clean the floor, I'll vacuum, and I'll put a load of laundry in, and my husband takes a shower. And that's the way it is, right? And meanwhile, I'm thinking I have to stop at the grocery store, I have to get some chicken, I have to make sure I get insurance on that car, and it's the mental load. And I actually listened to a really powerful podcast, and I'm actually going to look for it right now.
Sure.
It was on Jim Weiss's podcast, and one of his guests, Shelley Zalis, I believe she started the Female Quotient. She said there's a question that we ask women, which is, how do you do it all? And men are never asked that question. Now, this is not a show about men and women. What it's about is how we identify ourselves. And so I think many of the moms that you referenced probably struggle to identify themselves without a title, because they would say mom, right? And now let's tie that to the profession we're talking about, which is school leader. And I think the mental load on school leaders, men and women, is immense. And
Yes.
that's what's so exhausting, right? And so that's why I think this challenge you've thrown out there, that abstract idea of core values, if we make that concrete for our leaders, what's that going to look like, right?
Yeah, yesterday I was having coffee with a friend who has recently left the profession, starting a new career, and he was in the work for probably 20 plus years. He's not actually ready to retire, but he was just had decided, I need to transition. So 13 years of school administration. And I asked him this question, Jen, that only another fellow school leader would get. I said, I'm really curious to know how you're doing now that you're having to break the adrenaline addiction. And his eyes got so wide, and he said, thank you for saying that. I'm really struggling, because in this new work, I'm learning a lot of things, but I've never once had an overwhelming moment like I did in school leadership. And I'm just saying that to anyone listening, because sometimes I think we just need to say it out loud. And you and I now work in support roles where I'm just going to say it straight up. I've never, or seldom, I still have hard days, but not anything compared to what it's like to be in that role where you're constantly managing crisis and situations. And so on the one hand, I want to say to anyone listening, as you step into December, thank you for your commitment, your undying, the sacrifices that you create, but also your commitment to wellness and self-care for yourself. Jen, there's so many directions I want to go with this conversation.
Right.
Because I'll say one other thing too. I have a guest on my show recently who's going to be introduced to our audience in about 5 or 6 months, because you and I both are doing interviews that don't get shared now for a long, long time. And it's a friend. I'm going to go ahead and say who it is, because when we introduce her to the rest of our audience, they'll recognize her. But Well, actually, I don't have her.
You don't know where
I don't
where
have.
to
I
go with
don't have her permission yet to say all this. But she did. So I will make you wait. But you're going to hear an interview with a friend of mine who did some really great work in her dissertation around educator and principal wellness, and she actually reached out to me for references to high achieving leaders she could interview, and their commitments. Her research is showing what you and I are talking about right now too, which is that people that do this work sustainably have to stay committed to their own physical wellness, to their strong boundaries, to aligning their values with their work. But it never makes it easy. It never makes it easy. And so if I'm going to bring this back to the question I asked you at the beginning, which is how would you define yourself apart from your labels? When I asked that question to this group the other day, I said, can I first say some things I see in you before you answer this question? So I want to say this to listeners. Because I see your courage and your tenacity and your commitment and your bravery and your thoughtfulness and your inspiration and your grit and your resilience and your ability to problem solve. And I don't think sometimes we recognize those are values that are transferable way beyond the labels and the titles that you have. And so if someone hasn't told you that lately, I just want to invite you to re-examine who you are, because who you are is pretty damn impressive. And so, Jen, other thoughts?
Well, I appreciate you saying that to our listeners. I was at a building this morning and I watched the principal navigate about 8 different situations going on and hold a coherent, thoughtful conversation with me at the same time.
Yeah,
And I said, my goodness, Julie, this is unbelievable. And I mean, it was everything. It was a parent calling whose child is terminally ill. It was a bus that was all kinds of mess. It was the school breakfast program. It was then the Ice Ice Baby song came on the music, the PA, and she said we play a song for 1 minute and that's the time that the kids have to leave breakfast and get to their class. And then her assistant principal's son needed some. I was like, this is mental load, right? This is what the adrenaline rush is. This is what we will miss when it's gone, but it's also what exhausts us.
yeah.
And, I was thinking about the friend you had coffee with. Adrenaline feels good. It really does. And to me, those are the times that I felt the most effective, when I could absorb all of these things and manage them well. But it's also what exhausts us at night and makes us wonder as principals, oh my goodness, what did I do good today? We forget all the good that we do in a day. And I've often encouraged principals, take that time, write down, some of the decisions you made today or the problems you solved today. You probably forget the ones that happened even 4 or 5 hours ago. So
Yeah.
we do need to take some time to pat ourselves on the back, to say, wow, I'm gritty, I'm tough, I'm compassionate, I'm empathetic, and really make that list of those core values that identify
I'm
us.
funny. I'm gracious. I'm nurturing. Because these are things I see in leaders all the time too. How in the world do they keep their sense of humor through all
Oh
of
my
this?
gosh.
And so, so at the risk of sounding preachy, I want to say a couple of applications. And I'll probably share this in the post that accompanies this podcast, because you and I have shared some of these notes in advance, and sometimes I'll put these on LinkedIn, sometimes I don't. But here's the challenge: when you apply your most important core values that define who you are to your work, then the chances are the outcomes are going to be better at reflecting those values. So when your work becomes tasks, it's really, it's like onerous. But when your work is reflecting somehow those values that you hold, there are some things we have to do that just are always going to be a pain. But sometimes it's a good way to reframe the work, because the inverse is true too. If we step into our work and we're letting fear guide us, or our egos get in the way, because I'm not listing these things as a way to make us be arrogant. I'm listing these things as a way for us to revisit our best versions of ourselves. If we step into it with fear or ego, then we're simply moving forward based back again on those titles, those labels, and we may fail to experience or cherish the moment that we're actually in. And people that are on the other side of us know it. Jen, we're having this conversation right after Thanksgiving, and we're looking at Christmas. And last year, I lost both my parents, and so holidays are still very special. And I can see the reflection of my parents and my family. So I miss them, but I also have the joy of seeing them reflected in all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember asking my dad one time when he was well into his 70s or maybe even his 80s, how do you want to be remembered? And he said something really simple. My dad had been in the military, had been a farmer, all these things, all these labels. But he said, I just want to be remembered as a man who loved and supported my family and my wife. Just a simple statement. But it summarized his values and his character.
Right.
And so it may not be warm and fuzzy to just remind leaders to remember the qualities of who you are apart from the titles and labels. But I kind of want to give a dare, like try it. Like if take the question to your partner, your spouse, or maybe somebody at work and say, if you had to describe me without using my job title or my role, how would you do that? And then maybe do that for yourself too.
Right.
And then ask the second question, okay, now how am I, as I move forward in my work, how is my work reflecting what I really believe is those most positive values that I have?
Well, and it might be fun too to add a step before the first step, which is like I imagine doing this with my husband and saying, here's what I think you're going to say. And I do believe my husband will say, to be a partner and to be a father is the most important. And so it might help you get to step 3 if you start with, here's what I think you'll say, because it will also tell you if those things are out of alignment with the people you love. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you, Jen, for letting me bring that conversation to listeners and Principal Matters listeners. Thank you for the amazing work that you do. I've said this before, Jen, but there's such a privilege and an honor to get to work like you and I do, supporting leaders, having walked in those shoes and now being able to step alongside people and see them shine and not be perfect. I like to do this to people all the time. The goal is growth, not perfection. And so I hope this conversation encourages you in your growth. Jen, how can listeners stay connected with you and your wonderful resources?
Absolutely. They can reach out to me at jenschwanke.com, and there they can subscribe to my weekly newsletter called Principal Problems with Dr. Jen.
And if you haven't, you're missing out every single week. They're so good, Jen. They're so good. And Principal Matters listeners, you can get summaries of these shows. We're everywhere. We're on YouTube.
We're everywhere.
We're on TikTok. All these places I didn't want to be. We're finally there. So go follow us and subscribe and share it with others, because if you do, it just means that more of us are learning together. So until next time, thanks for doing what matters. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.